The first signs appeared on Kepler Station, a sprawling trade hub orbiting the neutral zone between the Galactic Federation and the Outer Rim territories. Ambassador Zelith of the Valian Collective had been monitoring human activities for the past 3 cycles, filing routine reports that painted humanity as a promising but unremarkable species. They were strong, yes, but so were the Korvaxi. They were adaptable, certainly, but the Threxians had survived in 13 different atmospheric compositions. What made humans special was their curious tendency to form emotional bonds with almost anything that moved. Zelith watched through the observation deck as a human cargo handler named Marcus Chen gently coaxed a frightened Pixarian child away from the loading bay. The child had wandered from the passenger section, probably scared by the noise of the massive freight containers being moved. Marcus knelt down to the child's eye level, his voice soft and patient, despite the urgent work schedule. The Pixarian's crystalline features gradually relaxed as Marcus showed him a small holographic toy from his pocket. "Fascinating," Zelith murmured into his recording device. "Subject continues to display protective instincts toward unrelated species offspring. This behavior appears consistent across human populations observed." What Zelith didn't understand, what none of the galactic observers understood, was that this wasn't just kindness. It was humanity's fundamental nature bleeding through every interaction. They didn't see the Pixarian child as an alien creature to be tolerated. They saw a scared kid who needed help. 3 sectors away, Captain Sarah Rodriguez was experiencing her own moment of clarity. Her exploration vessel, the Perseverance, had responded to a distress signal from a Zenthari mining operation. The Zenthari were a proud species, tall and imposing with natural armor plating and a culture built around individual achievement. They rarely asked for help, which made the distress call unusual. When Sarah's team arrived, they found the mining station partially collapsed after a seismic event. 17 Zenthari miners were trapped beneath tons of crystallized rock, and their rescue equipment had been damaged in the collapse. The station commander, a warrior named Thorek, stood rigid with barely contained frustration. "We have contacted proper Zenthari rescue services," Thorek announced stiffly. "They will arrive in 47 standard hours." Sarah looked at the readings on her scanner. "Commander, with respect, your people have maybe 12 hours of air down there. This is Zenthari responsibility. We do not require outside assistance." Sarah could have pushed harder. She could have argued or threatened. Instead, she did something that would later be recorded in 17 different xenological studies. She walked over to the collapsed section and started moving rocks with her bare hands. "What are you doing?" Thorek demanded. "Helping," Sarah replied simply, not stopping her work. "My crew's good at this stuff." Her team joined her without being asked. They worked for 11 straight hours, their human endurance allowing them to maintain effort long after other species would have collapsed. They didn't use their advanced Earth equipment initially, instead working alongside the Zenthari using their methods, their tools, respecting their way of doing things while still getting the job done. When they finally broke through to the trapped miners, Thorek stood in stunned silence. The humans had torn their hands bloody moving rocks. Lieutenant Kim had dislocated her shoulder but kept working. Engineering Chief Patel had worked through what was obviously a severe headache from the station's atmosphere recyclers malfunctioning. "Why?" Thorek asked Sarah as they watched the rescued miners being treated. "Why damage yourselves for strangers?" Sarah looked at him with genuine confusion. "They weren't strangers. They were people who needed help." The reports from both incidents made their way through the galactic intelligence networks. In the gleaming spires of the Valian capital, High Counselor Nereth reviewed the data with growing unease. The humans had been in galactic society for barely 50 standard years, yet incident reports involving their species were becoming increasingly common. Not conflict reports or territorial disputes, but something far more unusual. They kept helping people. On Arcturus 7, human medics had worked for 6 months straight to contain a plague that was ravaging the local Kelthrian population. They could have left after the first week when their diplomatic immunity was established. Instead, Dr. Jennifer Walsh had submitted a request to permanently relocate to Arcturus 7 to continue her research into Kelthrian physiology. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, human engineer David Kim had spent his entire savings to repair the atmospheric processors in the refugee quarter. When asked why he'd bankrupted himself for aliens who couldn't even pronounce his name, Kim had simply said they needed clean air. The Corvanti border war had provided the most disturbing data point of all. When the aggressive Corvanti Empire had attacked the peaceful Dalari colonies, the Galactic Federation had responded with the standard protocol: economic sanctions and a formal condemnation. The humans had responded by sending volunteer fighters to train the Dalari in guerrilla warfare tactics. Commander Elena Vasquez had led a group of 300 human tourists to Dalari space. Within 6 months, they had taught the previously pacifist Dalari how to build improvised explosives, set ambushes, and conduct hit-and-run attacks that made the superior Corvanti forces look like amateurs. When the Corvanti finally withdrew, they left behind equipment, territory, and a deep respect for both Dalari courage and human tactical ingenuity. "They don't fight like civilized species," the Corvanti general had reported. "They fight like the terrain itself has come alive to kill you." High Counselor Nereth read these reports in his private study, the bioluminescent panels casting eerie shadows across his elongated features. The Valian Collective had maintained galactic peace for 3,000 years through careful manipulation and strategic alliances. They understood how species behaved. Aggressive species could be contained through deterrence. Territorial species could be managed through buffer zones. Even chaotic species followed predictable patterns once you understood their motivations. Humans followed no such patterns. "Counselor," his aide announced through the communication panel, "the human delegation has arrived for the Federation Assembly meeting." Nereth straightened his formal robes and made his way to the council chambers. Today's session would address the Corvanti situation and the human involvement. It should have been a simple matter of censuring the humans for interfering in galactic affairs. Instead, Nereth found himself facing something unprecedented. Ambassador Chen Wei stood at the speaking podium with the casual confidence that seemed to characterize all humans. Behind him sat representatives from 47 different species, many of whom had never spoken to each other before the humans arrived. "Honored counselors," Ambassador Chen began, "I want to address the concerns raised about human involvement in recent galactic events. Yes, we helped the Dalari defend themselves. Yes, we assisted in medical crises on Arcturus 7. Yes, we've been involved in rescue operations across 17 different systems." He paused, looking directly at Nereth. "We did these things because they needed to be done, because people were suffering, and we had the ability to help." Counselor Vexith of the Threxian Republic leaned forward. "Ambassador Chen, your species seems incapable of understanding proper diplomatic protocol. Every action has consequences. Every intervention creates obligations." "You're right," Chen replied. "Every action does have consequences. The consequence of helping the Dalari is that a peaceful species is still alive. The consequence of our medical aid is that the plague on Arcturus 7 killed thousands instead of millions. The consequence of our rescue operations is that people went home to their families." "But what do you want in return?" pressed Counselor Morthek of the Corvaxi Dominion. "What is the price for this aid?" Ambassador Chen looked genuinely puzzled. "Want in return? We want people to be safe. We want kids to grow up healthy. We want species to be free to choose their own paths without being bullied by neighbors who think might makes right." The council chamber fell silent. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever given that answer. Nereth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature controls. He was beginning to understand what they were dealing with. Humans didn't help people because they expected rewards or strategic advantages. They helped people because they couldn't stand not to. And if that was true, if humans really were a species that would sacrifice their own comfort and safety for strangers they barely understood, then the galaxy was about to change in ways that no amount of careful planning could predict. After the session, Nereth retreated to his private office and opened a classified communication channel to the other major powers. The message he sent was brief but carried implications that would reshape galactic politics. We need to discuss the human problem. They're not like us. They're not like anyone, and that terrifies me. The response came back within hours from intelligence services across the galaxy. The Korvaxi had noticed it. The Zenthari had documented it. Even the isolationist ethereal conclave had observed the pattern. Humanity was spreading something through the galaxy that hadn't existed before. Not conquest or domination, but something far more dangerous to the established order. They were spreading hope. And hope, as any student of galactic history knew, was the most dangerous force in the universe. The Valian War Council met in absolute secrecy, their deliberations shielded by quantum encryption fields that could stop a determined thought from escaping the chamber. High Counselor Nereth looked around the curved table at representatives from 7 major galactic powers, each of whom controlled hundreds of star systems and billions of lives. Each of whom was now genuinely afraid of a species that had been spacefaring for less than a century. "The contamination is spreading faster than we projected," reported Intelligence Director Kareth, her voice carrying the clinical detachment that made her so effective at her job. 17 more species have established formal diplomatic relations with humanity in the past month alone, not trade agreements or non-aggression pacts. Actual alliances. General Vorthak of the Korvaxi military caste slammed his armored fist against the table. "This is unacceptable. 100 cycles of careful balance destroyed by one primitive species that can't grasp basic galactic politics." "They grasp it perfectly," Nereth replied quietly. "That's what makes them dangerous. They understand our system completely and they've decided to ignore it." The holographic display in the center of the table showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with human influence marked in spreading blue patterns. It looked disturbingly like a virus consuming healthy tissue. "They've established what they call cultural exchange programs with 43 species," continued Kareth. "Human scientists working alongside Zenthari engineers. Human artists collaborating with Pixarian crystal singers. Human philosophers debating ethics with the ethereal conclave. Worse than that," added Counselor Jex of the Threnodi Empire, "they're teaching other species to think like them. The Delari have started their own aid missions to refugee populations. The Kelthrians have formed what they call a medical volunteer corps to respond to humanitarian crises. Even the Korvaxi have begun questioning the wisdom of solving everything through force." General Vorthak's mandibles clicked in agitation. "Our young warriors speak of proportional response and civilian protection. They ask why we must conquer when we could simply negotiate. It's disgusting." Director Kareth activated a new display showing communication intercepts. "These are messages between human colonies and their government. No encryption, no hidden meanings. They actually mean what they say." The council members leaned forward to read the intercepted communications. What they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about intelligent species behavior. A message from Dr. Sarah Kim on Proxima Station read, "The Threxian children here are showing signs of malnutrition, requesting emergency food shipments and pediatric medical supplies. Will cover costs from research budget if necessary." From Captain Miguel Santos aboard the exploration vessel Endeavor. "Encountered Corvanti refugee ship with failing life support. Rendering assistance despite being technically in neutral space. Will accept responsibility for any diplomatic complications." from Professor Janet Liu at the Human Cultural Institute. The Pixarian students are struggling with human mathematical concepts, but their crystal-based logic systems offer fascinating new approaches to quantum computing, proposing joint research initiative to benefit both species. They actually care about other species, Director Kareth said, her voice carrying a note of disbelief even after months of observation. Not as tools or resources or potential allies. They care about them as individuals with inherent worth. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. There's something else, Nareth said finally. Something we discovered in the deep psychological profiles. Humans bond with other species not despite the differences, but because of them. They find diversity beautiful. The concept was so alien to the assembled council that several members required translation matrix assistance to process it. That's impossible, General Vorthak stated flatly. Species compete. It's the fundamental law of evolution. Cooperation only occurs when there's mutual benefit. Not with humans, Nareth replied. Watch this. The holographic display showed footage from a human colony world called New Geneva. The camera followed a human family through their daily routine. The father, James Peterson, worked at a terraforming station alongside a mixed crew of 7 different species. During his lunch break, he shared food with a Kelthrian colleague whose physiology couldn't process standard rations. The mother, Lisa Peterson, taught at a school where human children learned alongside young Pixarians, Zentheri, and even a few ethereal offspring. But it was their daughter who provided the most disturbing data point. 8-year-old Emma Peterson had formed a friendship with a young Corvanti warrior's child named Grexth. The two played together every day after school, Emma teaching Grexth human games while Grexth shared Corvanti hunting songs. The sight of a human child and a Corvanti child working together to build a treehouse was unsettling in ways that the council couldn't properly articulate. They're teaching their children that other species aren't just allies of convenience, observed Councillor Jex. They're teaching them that diversity makes everyone stronger. Which brings us to the real problem, Nareth said, his tone growing grim. We've been monitoring human military doctrine and their response to threats. They don't just protect their own people. They protect everyone they've decided to care about. The display changed to show tactical analyses from human military simulations. The data was sobering. Human forces train for asymmetric warfare against superior opponents, reported General Vorthak, his professional soldier's mind unable to ignore the implications even as his political instincts recoiled. They specialize in making any war too costly to continue, but their definition of acceptable losses includes protecting allied civilian populations at the expense of military objectives. They'll take casualties to avoid collateral damage, added Kareth. Even when those casualties are strategically unnecessary, they value the lives of non-combatants more than tactical advantage. Councillor Morthek leaned forward. Are you saying they would sacrifice their own soldiers to protect enemy civilians? We're saying they already have, Nareth replied. Battle of Kepler's Edge. Human Marines held a defensive position for 18 hours longer than tactically sound to ensure civilian evacuations were completed. They took 40% casualties when they could have withdrawn with minimal losses. But those were Kelthrian civilians, General Vorthak protested. They weren't even human allies at the time. Exactly, Nareth said quietly. That's what makes them so dangerous. The council fell silent again as the implications sank in. A species that would sacrifice its own people to protect strangers was unprecedented in galactic history. It meant that traditional deterrence strategies were useless against them. How do you threaten a species that places others' welfare above their own survival? There's more, Kareth continued. Intelligence reports from human military academies show they're developing new doctrines specifically for protecting multi-species populations. They call it Guardianship Protocol. The basic premise is that any attack on a human ally is treated as an attack on humanity itself, regardless of the species involved or the strategic value of the relationship. That's strategically insane, General Vorthak declared. They're pledging to fight wars they can't win for people who can't help them. Which makes them unpredictable, Nerith replied. And unpredictability is the enemy of stable governance. Director Kareth activated another display showing economic data. Their trade practices are equally concerning. They sell advanced technology at cost to developing species. They provide medical aid without patent restrictions. They share agricultural techniques that could revolutionize food production across the galaxy. And they ask for nothing in return except peaceful cooperation. They're undermining the entire basis of galactic economics, Counselor Jex observed. If species can get advanced technology without paying tribute to major powers, what's to stop them from declaring independence? Nothing, Nerith replied, which is exactly what's starting to happen. The display showed a map of the Outer Rim territories, where dozens of minor species had begun forming what they called the Cooperative Council. Unlike traditional galactic government, which operated on hierarchical power structures, the cooperative made decisions through consensus building and resource sharing. They're creating an alternative to our system, Kareth explained, one based on mutual aid instead of strategic dominance, and it's spreading. General Vorthak stood abruptly. This ends now. We mobilize our fleets and remove the human threat before it destabilizes the entire galaxy. With what justification? Asked Counselor Morthek. They haven't attacked anyone. They've violated no treaties. Their only crime is helping people. That's justification enough, Vorthak replied. They're a threat to galactic stability. Are they? Nerith asked quietly. Or are we? The question hung in the air like a toxic atmosphere. For 3,000 years, the major powers had maintained peace through careful management of conflicts, strategic resource control, and the implicit threat that stepping out of line would result in economic or military retaliation. It had worked because every species understood the rules. Humans didn't just break the rules, they offered a better alternative. We need to act soon, Director Kareth warned. Our latest projections show that within 50 years, a majority of galactic species will have established some form of cooperative relationship with humanity. Once that happens, our ability to control galactic affairs diminishes exponentially. What do you recommend? Asked Counselor Jex. Nerith looked around the table at his fellow leaders, seeing the fear in their eyes. Fear of losing power, yes, but also something deeper. Fear that maybe, just maybe, the humans were right. We give them something to be furious about, he said finally. We force them to show their true nature. If they're really the peaceful idealists they pretend to be, they'll negotiate. If they're conquerors in disguise, they'll reveal themselves. And if they're exactly what they appear to be? Asked Counselor Morthek. Nerith's expression grew cold. Then we remind the galaxy why they've feared Deathworlders for 3 million years, and hope we can contain the storm that follows. The attack came without warning, which was exactly as the Valian Collective had planned it. New Harmony was a small agricultural world in the Beta sector, home to 40,000 humans and 30,000 refugees from 17 different species. It had been humanity's most successful integration experiment, a place where children of different species played together in schools designed to accommodate everything from Kelthrian physiology to ethereal energy patterns. The crops grown there fed refugee populations across 3 sectors. It was also completely defenseless. The Corvanti strike force arrived in overwhelming numbers, their massive dreadnoughts blotting out the star as they took position around the planet. General Vorthak himself led the assault, broadcasting a message that was recorded and transmitted across the galaxy within minutes. By order of the Galactic Stability Council, the illegal colony of New Harmony is hereby dissolved. All human residents will be relocated to designated containment facilities. Non-human refugees will be returned to their species of origin for proper processing. Captain Elena Rodriguez was in the planetary governor's office when the message came through. She'd been visiting New Harmony to inspect their success in developing new agricultural techniques when the Corvanti fleet appeared. As she watched the massive ships position themselves for bombardment, she felt something cold and terrible settling in her chest. "Governor Chen," she said quietly, "how long until the evacuation transports arrive?" Governor Marcus Chen was a farmer who'd never wanted to be a politician. He'd taken the job because someone needed to coordinate the refugee resettlement programs. Now he stood at the window watching death descend from space with the resignation of a man who'd always known this day would come. "The nearest human fleet is 6 days away," he replied. "Our emergency signals went out 12 minutes ago." Elena nodded, her mind already shifting into the cold, tactical mode that had made her one of humanity's most effective military commanders. "How many children are in the schools right now?" "About 8,000 across all species." "Evacuation bunkers?" "Built for natural disasters, not orbital bombardment. They'll buy us maybe 3 hours." Elena looked out at the Corvanti fleet and felt the fury building. Not the hot anger that led to mistakes, but the cold rage that had made Earth's predators apex killers for millions of years. The Corvanti had made a critical error in their planning. They'd assumed humans would respond like other civilized species. They were about to learn why that assumption was fatal. "Marcus," Elena said quietly, "get on the emergency broadcast system. Tell everyone to begin evacuation procedures, but don't panic them. Make it sound routine." "What are you going to do?" Elena was already activating her personal communicator, sending coded messages to contacts across human space. "I'm going to remind the galaxy why they used to be afraid of Deathworlders." The Corvanti ultimatum was simple. All humans had 6 hours to report to designated collection points for transport to internment facilities. Non-human refugees would be separated and processed according to their species status in the galactic hierarchy. Resistance would be met with overwhelming force. What the Corvanti didn't understand was that they hadn't just threatened 40,000 humans on New Harmony. They had threatened 62 different species that humanity had decided to care about. The response began 4 hours later. The first sign was a Zenthari battlecruiser dropping out of hyperspace directly between the Corvanti fleet and the planet. The massive ship was heavily armed but outnumbered 20-1. Its commander, Captain Thorek, opened communications on all frequencies. "This is the Zenthari defense vessel Unbreakable Honor. Any attempt to harm the civilians below will be considered an act of war against the Zenthari Republic." General Vorthak couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Captain Thorek, this operation has been sanctioned by the Galactic Stability Council. Stand down immediately." "Negative," Thorek replied. "The humans of New Harmony saved 17 of my warriors when Honor demanded we refuse their aid. Honor now demands we repay that debt." Before Vorthak could respond, more ships began dropping out of hyperspace. A Kelthrian medical frigate took position next to the Zenthari cruiser. "This is Dr. Kesatha aboard the Healing Light. We are here to provide medical assistance to our human colleagues and the refugee populations they protect." A squadron of Delari fighters arrived next, their small ships darting between the massive Corvanti dreadnoughts like angry insects. "This is Wing Commander Sareth of the Delari Defense Corps. We remember what humanity taught us about courage." More ships kept arriving, Pixarian crystal ships that sang haunting melodies as they approached. Threxian research vessels bristling with improvised weapons, even a massive ethereal consciousness ship, its translucent hull pulsing with alien thoughts. Within 2 hours, the space around New Harmony had become the largest multi-species fleet in galactic history. But it was the human response that truly terrified the Corvanti. The first human ship to arrive wasn't a military vessel. It was the merchant freighter Lucky Strike, captained by a grizzled trader named Jake Morrison. Morrison had been hauling mining equipment to Proxima Station when he received Elena's coded message. He'd immediately changed course, knowing he was flying into a battle he couldn't win. "Corvanti Fleet," Morrison broadcast, his voice carrying the flat certainty of a man who'd made his final decision. "This is Captain Morrison of the Lucky Strike. I'm carrying 17,000 tons of agricultural equipment and no weapons worth mentioning, but if you fire on those kids down there, you're going to have to go through me to do it." The Lucky Strike was followed by dozens of other civilian vessels, freighters, passenger ships, even private yachts. Humans from across the galaxy had abandoned whatever they were doing and rushed toward New Harmony, not because they had any hope of victory, but because their people were in danger. General Vorthak watched the growing fleet with increasing unease. This wasn't how civilized species were supposed to behave. When faced with overwhelming force, rational beings negotiated. They didn't throw themselves into hopeless battles for the sake of strangers. "All vessels," he broadcast, "you are vastly outnumbered. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." The response came from Captain Elena Rodriguez, who had somehow acquired command of a human destroyer that had just arrived at the edge of the system. "General Vorthak," Elena's voice carried across the comm channels with Arctic calm, "you've made a mistake. You've confused kindness with weakness. You've mistaken compassion for cowardice. You've assumed that because we choose cooperation over conquest, we're incapable of war." The human destroyer began moving toward the Corvanti fleet, followed by the growing armada of allied vessels. "You want to know what makes humans dangerous?" Elena continued. "It's not that we're stronger or faster or smarter than everyone else. It's that we decided a long time ago that some things are worth dying for. And today, you threatened some of those things." More human ships were arriving every minute now. Military vessels, yes, but also the civilian fleet that formed the backbone of human space travel. Miners and traders and scientists and farmers, all armed with whatever they could find and absolutely determined to protect the children sheltering on New Harmony. "We've spent 50 years making friends across this galaxy," Elena's voice continued. "We've helped species that couldn't help us in return. We've shared technology and knowledge and hope with anyone who asked. We've tried to build something better than the system of fear and dominance that you call civilization." The human fleet was moving into attack formation now, their ragtag collection of ships somehow managing to coordinate like they'd trained together for years. Behind them, the alien vessels that had answered humanity's call maintained perfect discipline despite representing dozens of different military traditions. "But you've made a choice today," Elena said. "You've decided that kindness is weakness. You've decided that hope is dangerous. You've decided that beings who protect each other instead of exploiting each other are a threat to galactic stability." General Vorthak felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine fear. Not of death in battle, which was an honorable end for a Corvanti warrior, but of the implications of what he was witnessing. If humans really would throw themselves into hopeless battles to protect aliens they barely knew, then every strategic calculation in galactic politics had just become worthless. "So let me be absolutely clear about something." Elena's voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any scream. "If you fire on those children, if you harm one refugee, if you cause even a moment of terror to the beings we've sworn to protect, then you will discover something the galaxy has forgotten." The human fleet was within weapons range now. Elena's destroyer led the charge, its weapon systems powered but not yet firing. The tension was thick enough to cut. "You will learn what happens when Deathworlders stop being nice." For a long moment, the space around New Harmony was perfectly silent. Hundreds of ships from dozens of species hung motionless in space, waiting to see who would fire the first shot. General Vorthak stared at the tactical display showing the impossible fleet arrayed against him. His ships still outnumbered the defenders, but he was beginning to understand that numbers might not matter. These beings weren't fighting for conquest or resources or political advantage. They were fighting for each other, and that made them the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he opened a communication channel. "All ships, this is General Vorthak. We are withdrawing to reevaluate the tactical situation." The Corvanti fleet began pulling back from New Harmony, their massive ships moving with the ponderous dignity of a retreating army. Elena Rodriguez watched them go with the satisfaction of a predator that had successfully defended its territory. Around her, the impossible fleet held formation until the last Corvanti ship disappeared into hyperspace. The Battle of New Harmony lasted less than 6 hours. Not a single shot was fired. No ships were destroyed. But the galaxy would never be the same. Within days, the story had spread to every inhabited system. The image of hundreds of ships from dozens of species standing together to protect children became the symbol of something new in galactic politics. Species that had never spoken to each other began forming defensive pacts. The Cooperative Council announced plans to formalize their alliance structure. Most importantly, the major powers' carefully maintained system of control through intimidation had been revealed as hollow. When pushed, smaller species hadn't backed down. They had found their courage and stood together. In his private study, High Counselor Nerith read the reports with the growing certainty that his civilization was ending. Not through conquest or catastrophe, but through something far more insidious: the spread of hope. The humans had proven that another way was possible, and once that seed was planted, there was no stopping it from growing. The galaxy had spent 3 million years fearing Deathworlders for their potential for violence. But in the end, it wasn't humanity's capacity for destruction that changed everything. It was their capacity for love.